So, good evening, and thank you for joining us for Blue Hill Box 2020 Virtual Festival. I'm Keith Hutchison, President of the Board of Blue Hill Bach, and we hope you're enjoying the events of this virtual festival and will continue to do so for the rest of the week. If you haven't seen the other videos we've released during the last several days, you'll have opportunities to see them in the archive section of our website. This virtual festival is, of course, not what we expected to be doing this summer, but there's still joy in putting this together, this wide range of programs for you, our audience, to see, to hear, and to join us in finding your own joy for this wonderful music. I have to thank our incredible musicians and other friends of Blue Hill Bach who have risen to the challenge of creating a virtual event such as this to share in this time of isolation. We have to thank our corporate and individual donors who have supported our efforts to make this festival available as possible. The Baroque Strings Masterclass is a unique event on the schedule. It's the only one that is live presented. It may seem very different from the other events, but it's completely in keeping with the educational importance of, or the importance of education as part of our mission. Because it is live, we certainly are pushing the technology and crossing our fingers that nothing crashes. We're together here, those of us, the students and the instructors and myself, we're together using Zoom. We moved you, the audience, onto our YouTube site so as to not be a distraction to the students. And frankly, part of this is a safety measure because all it takes is one open mic in your speaker to create an acoustic hall of mirrors and result in chaos. So we're recording this event, and like the others, it will be available on archive. The students are all from the studio of Anatole Wieck. Anatole gets to sit back and enjoy the products of his work. Jude Ziliak is the instructor for tonight's masterclass. Many of you will know Jude from past festivals. He played the solo violin for summer in Vivaldi's Concerto for Four Seasons last Thursday. You'll hear him on this coming Thursday in a play and talk session about the solo violin suites of Johann Paul von Westhoff. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Jude and the students. Benjamin Walker, who's playing on the violin, Elora Keles, who's on the cello, Brandon Aponte on the violin, and Colin Aponte on the violin. I'm going to be muting my microphone and turning off my camera, and I get to work in the background and try to make sure all the buttons get pushed at the right time, and this goes as smoothly as possible. So at this point, Jude, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Keith, and thank you to all four of you, Benjamin, Elora, Colin, and Brandon, for joining us for this. And Anatole, thank you so much for bringing your wonderful students into our festival yet again. It's really quite a pleasure to see all of you over Zoom. I wish it were in person, but it makes us all feel just that little bit more connected. And I think that there's still a great deal that we can do in this time of isolation. In fact, we can maybe make time for some things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. So I'll say more at the end and to each of you individually, but for now, I'd like to turn it back to Keith for the screen share. And thank you so much, Keith, for doing the screen shares. I'm so glad that I don't have to do it. To hear Benjamin Walker's performance of the second and third movements of Handel's Sonata in F major. Bravo, Benjamin. Thank you very much for sharing your performance with us. I am really grateful to you for that and for presenting it with accompaniment as well. It's been a bit of a rarity in these, well, since March. Thank you.
The accompaniment was my father.
Excellent. That helps a lot. Well, thanks to him as well. You know, what I really enjoy and appreciate a lot about your playing, and I think gives you a sort of long head start into the way that you can think about 18th century music in general, is that you're very, very sensitive to harmony. The way that you play, the way that you respond to the tension and release of the harmony, and the relative importance of notes that change the harmony versus notes that reinforce an existing harmony is really good. And that's a really, really good foundation for the interpretation of Baroque music. So bravo for that, terrific. I wanna work just a little bit in each movement, but it's, in the first movement, I wanna just draw one technical point to your attention that I think is useful in making the kind of translation of this piece to the modern equipment that you're using. Now, I know from your teacher that you have a Baroque violin coming into your possession, is that right? Oh, wow, there it is. Fantastic. Absolutely great. And do you have a bow as well?
I have one on order. It hasn't arrived yet, though.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm delighted to see it. And maybe we can, if we have time, maybe we can actually get it out. I mean, get it going a little bit. But but for the point that I wanted to raise has to do with the construction of the bow, the Baroque bow versus the modern bow. because I think that a lot of the articulations that you're getting are kind of being conditioned by the part of the bow that you're using. You're tending to play very much at the tip of the bow. Now, for those of you on YouTube, this is the tip of the modern bow. And this is a modern bow. And it's fairly high up off the hair. Shouldn't be quite that high up, but it's fairly high up off the hair, and it's there's a lot of tension here, and it's the second strongest part of the bow after the frog, where you hold it. And you can get very sharp, strong bow strokes and very even bow strokes at the tip of the modern bow. The 18th century bow doesn't work that way. The tip is quite weak, and therefore it's not, I mean, certainly one can play at the tip, but you simply don't have at the tip of the Baroque bow the kind of easy reinvigoration of the stroke that you have with the modern bow. So I would suggest really that when you play a Handel sonata on a modern bow, that you start as a starting point so that you can get accustomed to the articulation palette. I would suggest that you start out by not using like from here up, basically. So stop playing where the camber of the bend in the stick stops tapering downward and starts tapering upward more sharply. So just sort of play in the lower 2/3 of the bow. And I think that would require a fairly significant adjustment, because you're tending to play out here, which gets these very even and regular kind of eighth notes. And by even, I mean even in weight and even in accentuation. And even if you still play on the string, which you don't have to do, if you play at the middle of the bow, I didn't mean to switch bows yet. With the modern bow, I haven't changed the bowings or anything. I've just changed parts of the bow, and already it's a lot lighter, which I think is an advantageous thing for this movement. So that's something to try to just give yourself that restriction, because it starts to approximate what you have here. Now, once you've actually gotten acclimated to playing with a real Baroque bow, then you don't have to have such rules for yourself when you go back to the modern bow, obviously. It's just a starting point. But do you want to just give a little bit of this movement a try with in the lower part of the bow?
Sure.
Great.
The Allegro?
Yes, please. Lovely. That's already a big difference. I think you could benefit from trying out the rest of the piece with that in mind. I want to spend most of our time actually in the third movement, but just one further idea about the first movement. So you have many places where Handel writes, where Handel's violin line is essentially divided into two voices. And a top line that is not changing, and a bottom line that is changing. For example, so the top line is just, and what I heard when you played it was there was beautiful shaping of, but this was all the same. And to me, that's a pity. If you say something repeatedly, it should change. You should say it with different inflection, right? And this comes from one of the basic principles of Baroque interpretation, that the music should be as intelligible and as vivid and as rhetorically clear as the speech of a great actor or a great orator. And I think if you hear a great orator or a great actor, they don't say the same thing with the same inflection over and over again, unless perhaps they're giving an impersonation of somebody who's mentally unwell or something like that. It's right. It's not. It needs to have a little more vitality, and there's no right or wrong way. It doesn't have. There's an old tradition of doing echoes on repetitions. Doesn't have to be that. It just has to be responsive to the melody and responsive to the harmony, and it has to change a little bit. So with that in mind, could you just play, we have a bunch of pedals, treble pedals, starting at bar 9, the B section. Do you want to just try some different things right there? Try varying it a little more. Thanks, good, it's already better. So one thought is this, sorry, I apologize for the pitch difference. I'll talk about that in a moment. I think you could, happens twice. So the second one could maybe be a little less accented and could lead a little more to the next, like this. And then here, what if you got a little bouncier? It doesn't have to be, you're already making a change. I like that you're adding in some slurs. That's really nice. Handel didn't write those slurs, but they're nice. But you're then playing the separate notes very, very gluey. They almost sound slurred. Why not make them a little more different? Again, the variety is the goal here. Once more.
From the same spot?
Say, please.
Okay. Without the slurs or with?
Oh, actually, as you like.
Okay.
Nice, well done. All right. Moving on, I just want to take a look at the third movement. So here, this largo is a good moment to talk a little bit about musical texts, because I think you folks, all of you young people in this class, have a huge advantage over even me. I'm only, I don't know, I'm only approximately double your age, not but even so, when I was a student, I had to work fairly hard to get a hold of high quality texts of older pieces that I was playing. So when I learned this sonata in the Suzuki books myself, I never saw the original score of the first publication from 1730. I don't think I saw it until I was 20. But it's readily available. You can download it on IMSLP tonight. It's an amazing difference. And I think there's a lot to be said, even if you're a devoted modern instrument player who only wants to play in a romantic style, which I know that you yourself are not, but even if one is, the availability of a composer's original musical texts today is astonishingly free, and we should take as much advantage as possible. So this edition has some beautiful but anachronistic fingerings and bowings that come from basically a late 19th century perspective on the piece. The Baroque violin, as you know, actually, maybe Benjamin, this is a good moment to get out your brand new fiddle. There was no chin rest and no shoulder rest. So moving from one position to another was a significantly bigger investment of energy, and people did it less often. So to get from the high notes of the instrument to the low notes of the instrument, people typically stayed in one position for longer stretches of time. Doesn't mean they didn't play up high, they did, but they would shift back and forth more conservatively. So fingerings like are really more typical of at least 60 years later and going forward from there. This is, for Handel's purposes, a fairly anachronistic fingering. So I would really suggest that you try it out, especially when you have a gut E string on, which is rather warmer than the metal E of your modern violin. I would really suggest that you try staying in lower positions significantly more and liberating yourself from the imposed fingerings of the editor, which are surprisingly distracting, I always find. Even if you know that they're not by the composer, they just stick in your head somehow. And also, I would just really advise you, again, regardless of what bowings you end up doing, I would recommend that you really get to know the autograph, well, it's not autograph, the first edition, which is readily available. The piece is probably not by Handel, so there's no manuscript because we don't know who wrote it. The publisher seems to have just kind of inserted it into the publication, Handel's Opus 1, in order to fill it out a little bit. So we don't really know whose markings we're looking at, but it would be good just to know with a little more clarity. For example, this at bar 14, this gesture. Now, the slurring from a weak beat pickup into a strong beat like that is not unheard of. It's not impossible in Handel's time, but it's very uncharacteristic. So I actually don't know. I have not performed this sonata since I was 11, but I would wager it's likely that that's not by Handel. If he did write that, it means something a little different from Suzuki marking it. This binding it together as one is taught to do in the Suzuki method and in modern violin pedagogy in general is, I think, is counter to what Handel would have expected, which is that each slur would be a different gesture, a different musical idea, and you don't want to bind them together too much. Or maybe but one way or another, there needs to be more air in the sound there. And I think you'll find, especially when you have a Baroque bow, but just having gut strings alone will make you want to do that a little bit more. So can you just try the second section? Try it all in first position. Try it without any shifting on your, if you don't mind, just a little bit of it on your new Baroque fiddle.
Okay. This is from measure 10 or bar 14?
Bar 10. Bravely done. Thank you so much for that. And it's it sounds lovely. And with the warmth of the E string, you don't really need the climbing up high. It doesn't. You don't lose anything. Well, I'm seeing the minutes tick away, and I think unfortunately we should move along. But I want to thank you so much. I wish we had all night. This is really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Keith, I think we can move on now to Elora Keles' recording of the Bach Cello Suite number 3, the Gigue. Bravo, Elora. First of all, I remember very clearly hearing you last summer, and I am absolutely amazed by the work that you've done. You've come a long way, and yeah, you're on a really great path. From a musical, pardon me?
I said thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for playing. The foundations of the style are really all there. From a kind of bird's eye perspective, there's not a lot to say. I think that the foundations of your interpretation are really, really strong. And you have a really good sense of the style and the feeling of motion and the structure of the piece. It's great. There are just a couple of things that I think are worth thinking about at this stage. And I'm going to be as non-technical as I can, both because we're speaking to a general audience here, and also because I'm very much not a cellist. But I think there's a couple. I think I love what you do musically when there are literally two voices, either because there's a pedal or because there are double stops. For me, you could do a little more to bring out the so-called implicit polyphony, which for the listening public, I'll just explain briefly, is the name for the phenomenon when a single singable musical voice implies two or more different voices with different harmonic functions. And Elora, you have a beautiful sense of the overall melodic direction, but sometimes in the implicit polyphony, there are different melodic directions implied for different voices. And I don't yet hear that. So for example, when you have that little figure, I hear a nice a nice ascent in the little notes, and I hear a nice ascent in this, but I don't really hear the little release that you could hear in this arpeggio, which I think would give it more poise and more grace. If it could both go down and up, it would have that little bit more texture to it. You want to try that?
Okay. Where is it? I'm trying to find it.
Unfortunately, my yeah, good. So you have that little diminuendo in the slurs now, but don't lose the feeling of the crescendo in the upper voice.
Okay. I might have accented them too much, but
Yeah, no, that's the idea. This is it's not an easy business, but that's the concept. One thing that I found technically that helps a lot with making that happen is to play with a relatively constant bow speed. This is partially for historical reasons, because if you read a large number of 17th and 18th century writings about string playing, one thing that you start noticing is that people don't talk that much about bow speed. That is to say, they might talk about using some bow speed to get resonance out of the instrument, but they don't talk about changing the bow speed for expressive purposes very much at all. And it really seems that the principal expressive device in this time was variation of the weight or the pressure, and also variation in the sounding point. That for the public, that's the distance of the bow from the bridge of the instrument, which changes the color of the sound, for like this versus this. So that was used, and then this kind of variation, where you have weight increasing as opposed to. And the reason for that, I think, is that gut strings don't take particularly kindly to sudden changes of speed. If you change the bow speed suddenly, you get a kind of sound like everything sounds on Zoom. I think you would find that a lot of the implied polyphony comes out a little more easily if you keep the bow moving at a slightly more steady speed and try changing the pressure a little more. So that's one idea. The other comment that I would make is to do with a little bit with fingering choices. So there's a general principle in this period that we try not to shift under slurs. That's something that you see written many times over in the 18th century. Now, it's often not attainable. Sometimes you just have to. And in Bach's music, very often you just have to. Like, there's literally no choice. But it does mean that you should try to hide the shifts as much as possible.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
No, I said okay.
Okay. I'm not going to make you try a bunch of spots, but just to make you aware, to the degree that the piece allows it, it would be a good idea to try to either pick fingerings that don't require a shift or to hide the shifts, unless you really mean them, which I think probably in this piece you don't, because they create a they add a certain kind of slurp into the sound that doesn't that seems a little mismatched with the clarity and grace and poise of the character of the piece, and which you're otherwise finding, I think, really beautifully. So I think that covers my basic thoughts. Bravo, I'm really so impressed with your work. Beautiful playing. And I think we can move to the Aponte brothers. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey there.
Hello.
Is this too high or should I be down here?
However it's comfortable.
All right. Let's sit down here then.
Great. So, do you want to, since you were performing live, do you want to announce what you're playing?
Oh, you can do it for me. It's fine.
Okay, great. So we have here Brandon Aponte playing the fugue from the G minor sonata for solo violin of Johann Sebastian Bach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bravo, well played. You know, when I was a kid, this was the first of the Bach fugues that I learned, and I kind of assumed at the time that that was because it was the easiest of the three. As I get older, I no longer am convinced that that's at all true. It's just the shortest. I think it might be the hardest. So it's very gnarly, well played. It's a tough thing, and I think you have a very compelling perspective on it. It's nice. One of the things that makes these pieces so challenging to translate to the modern violin from the instrument for which they were conceived has to do with the relative volume of the registers of the instrument. Now, the E string of it used to be said that the E string of the Baroque violin was not under very much pressure, because when people first started using period instruments in the 1950s, 1960s, early 70s, they were basically taking the gut strings that were still under manufacturing for modern instruments and sticking them on to their Baroque fiddles, and they were very light tension, and it resulted in this very low tension sound with a very sweet, gentle E string. We now know, there's been a lot of research on historical string gauges. We now know that the Baroque E string was under a whole lot of pressure, and people have started using very thick strings that actually make a rather bright and brilliant sound relative to what was in use in the 70s. But still, despite that, when you play on a modern steel E string, the upper registers of the chords just kind of naturally seem to want to sing in a certain kind of way. And the G string tends on most modern violins to be a little bit duller by comparison. And it's just not so with the Baroque instrument. I mean, so at the opening, something like this. This comes out just as clearly as, whereas without even really wanting to do it differently, those notes just kind of want to pop. So I think when you're playing it on a modern instrument, you actually have to fight that a little bit because of two reasons. The first is that when you have a fugal voice that is moving in the lower voices of the chords, I often can't really hear it. Of course, it's Zoom, that could be the issue, but I think that it's I think that the chords are generally very strongly balanced to the top, and in general, in Baroque music, you really want the opposite. Even if you're playing in a fairly romantic style, the music starts to lose its coherence if you don't have the resonance of the bass notes in a really strong way. It's a very bass-driven style, 18th century music in general. Right around the time that Bach wrote these pieces, maybe a decade later, Rameau wrote his famous treatise on harmony, in which he laid out the concept of chords as we understand them today. Basically, he outlined the modern concept of triadic harmony, where everything comes from the bass. And he was describing a concept that was kind of in the air. It was reflective of how composers were writing. It was a very bottom-up approach. And Bach read Rameau, we know that. So this, I think it's appropriate to think of this as much more driven from the bass. So what I would suggest is that you just really try to privilege the lower strings as much as you can. Maybe we could pick a spot. Actually, that's a good spot because it's not the thorniest. Do you want to play the beginning again with that in mind? See how much resonance you can get out of the lower voices in the first couple lines. Yeah, good, thank you. To my mind, something, the most interesting note in the chord should ideally be the loudest one, unless there's a fugal voice that you really have to bring out. So then therefore you have to make everything else a little bit proportionately quieter than that. So something like, we kind of know the second note of the subject is going to be the G, right? So the C is what we really want to hear there, the resolution. So you have to relax this a little more, something like that, for example. Yeah. So I think the concept is clear. I'll switch fiddles again. The one other thing that I would say to you for now, so I loved your cadenza-esque ending. I thought it was beautiful. I want to make you aware that there's a possibility of a little more variety of articulation in the episodes with the separate notes. And there's a very, very interesting copy. It's called, Bach scholars call it source E. It's like a student or maybe a student of a student of Bach's copy of these pieces from a few years after he wrote them, in which there are a lot of alternate articulations. And I haven't practiced this, but just so you can hear how extreme the amount of variety of articulation is, I'll play for you what source E gives for the second episode of this piece. Etc. So it's kind of amazing. It's a different set of bowings for every harmony that occurs. So even without changing the bowings, you can, I think, look for much more variety in the articulation, even before you get to dynamics, in places like that. So without necessarily, if you can change the bowings if you want to, but can you maybe play that episode once more at bar 42 and just give us as much variation as you can? Good. That's already, to my mind, much more interesting and much more sort of cogent also. I would just add further that if you look at Francesco Gemignani's book on violin playing, and he was one of the concertmasters for Handel's orchestra, so he was kind of in the same, even though he lived in England and was Italian by birth, he was kind of in the same overall musical circles as Bach. In his catalogs of articulations, the only ones that he describes as bad, he describes them all as either good, mediocre, or bad. One is ottimo, the best. The worst thing for Gemignani is 2 or 4 notes in a row with the exact same articulation. So just always be varying, not randomly, with the harmony, with the character, but always be changing, always be varying. And take a look, the Wiener Urtext edition of the Sonatas and Partitas reproduces the bowings from source E, which are really cool if you want to take a look at them. I think that's the easiest way to get a hold of it. But I think that does it for now. We can turn the mic over to your brother. Thank you very much, and nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Bravo.
1 second.
It's like a magic.
So we next have Colin Aponte playing the Bach Gigue from, I actually don't know whether it's the D minor partita or the E major.
It's the D minor.
Okay, great. Bravo, Colin. Well done.
Thank you.
Nicely played. This is such a beautiful movement. You know, one of the funny things about this piece is that, you know, if that were the end of the partita, it would be perfectly good. You'd have a perfectly normal Baroque partita with a complete structure and a beautiful, fantastic, satisfying virtuoso movement to conclude it. Of course, that's not what happens, as you know. We instead have 15 minutes more of chaconne. But it's, but I think for me, you do a beautiful job of capturing the kind of melancholy and contemplative aspects of this piece, and in some places the virtuosity also. But what I do not have yet is the kind of festive aspect, which might sound a little strange considering that it comes in between the saddest saraband in the world and the big grand eternal chaconne, right? But still, it is a jig, it is a jig, it is the same dance as, you know, the Irish fiddle dance, really. It's the same, or it's the same thing. And it's got to have a little more sense of a kind of a whirl, a more festive quality, I think. And for me, it's not a matter of playing faster. I mean, you could, of course, but it's not a matter of playing faster. It's a matter of how frequently you place accents, because the jig really is a duple meter dance. It's notated with 4 beats to the bar in this case, but there should only be 2 feelings of pulsation. So if you play, you didn't do that, of course, I'm exaggerating, but if you, then you've already set up this bump, bump, very vertical thing. And whereas if you, even playing at a somewhat restrained tempo, if you, have a feeling of only putting an accent on the odd numbered beats of the bar, the first beat and the third beat, unless there's a really good harmonic or melodic reason to bring out something super special, then you have this wonderful feeling of a kind of rubber band being pulled back and then snapping as the harmony releases, which gives it a fantastic sense of motion that for me it's missing a little bit, because they're just, for my taste, there's just a few too many, like you sit down a little bit. So do you want to try that? Can we just try removing approximately half the accents?
Okay, sure.
Great. Yeah, great. It's very elegant the way that you play it. I like that a lot. For me, there's a larger structure in this first phrase, which is really interesting, which is that you have the basic metrical structure that I just talked about, but you also have a harmonic structure that is it's a chiasmus. It's an X. You have D minor, A major, D minor, which personally suspect is not an accident, because it makes the shape of a cross. It's a kind of musical figure that you have scattered throughout Bach's works. And you can bring it out more by creating more tension in the A major, which is the dominant harmony, and releasing it more on the D minor. So I don't know if that's messing too much with your concept, but you might try that, because for me it feels like the tension goes out a little bit in the A major bits. Can you just try that once more?
Sure.
Great, super. Okay, so the two other general stylistic ideas that I wanted to propose to you are, first of all, just I think you need to consider the slurs a little bit. Right now, I mean, you follow them. You do, in fact, very admirably. You do exactly what's written, even when it's not convenient, I think, which is terrific. But I think you could get more musical meaning out of them. But Bach's slurring is such a topic of people's contention and thought that the musicologist and performer John Butt wrote a whole book about it. And it's really worth thinking about why three notes are bound together and three notes aren't. And we have, for those of you in YouTube land who may not know, we have a beautifully, amazingly clear autograph from Bach. Very different situation, Elora, than what you have in the cello suites, where we do not have Bach's manuscript. We're so lucky to know exactly, exactly what articulations Bach was writing down in almost every case. So I think I can't give you any hard and fast rules about what a slur means, other than to say that it should be a discrete musical unit. You should be able to tell, the listener should be able to tell where it starts and where it stops. And I think if you do that, if you create a tiny, can be almost imperceptible, but if you create a little feeling of beginning and end on the slurs, you will start to find a little more feeling of light in this piece. There will start to be like sunlight coming in through the drapes. Right. And I think it would help you find a rhythmic structure that would maybe be a little more, have a little more nuance, I guess. I think that is, let's see, maybe we can just pick one spot to look at some slurs in, and then we'll have to stop. Do you want to try bar 7, or maybe leading into bar 7?
Sure.
Great. Thank you. So I already hear a little articulation, which is great. I think the next step would be to think about how to make each slur a little different from the others in accordance with its harmonic and melodic characteristics. For example, the pitch transition is a little too much to deal with. This one is tenser than the one that follows. And then coming down a little bit. And then the next round of them has a slightly different shape because the notes rise within the slurs, as opposed to the little circular motif. So just, again, consider the slurs is my last word of guidance about it. So thank you so much, Colin. Bravo. Really well done. And terrific. Before we wrap up for the evening, I'm just going to say a few general words to all four of you about historical string playing. And I guess I want to encourage you. So obviously I'm a specialist, and all of us here at Blue Hill Bach are specialists, and we, but our intention in having this masterclass is not necessarily to say, you should come to the dark side with us. Baroque string playing is not an either-or game. The music of the 18th century is a heritage that is equally available to everybody, regardless of what kind of instrument you play, even if you play the vibraphone. So but what I think is great is for everybody to have an awareness of the equipment that was known to the composers when they were writing, because it really tremendously influenced the way that they wrote. And I think it's I think at this point in history, where there's such a long tradition now of historical string playing, I think that there's every reason to just to operate with knowledge as you go forward. And what does that mean? Well, of course, you can listen to recordings, you can go to concerts, those are great things to do, but that's hearing contemporary people's responses to historical information. And what I would really encourage you to do is to, as you develop your fingers and your agility and your ears as you grow up as musicians, also develop an awareness of history and of philology, and really, really try to always, whenever you learn a new piece of music that was not written yesterday by a friend of yours, really don't take for granted the notes that you see on the page. Don't take it for granted that the edition that you are looking at is accurate. Don't take it for granted that fingerings and bowings that you're looking at come from the composer. And also, don't ever look at a string of bowings and think of them as just directions about what direction to move your bow. Always be asking, why are those notes grouped together? What is, and what does that slur mean? Does it mean simply to play them legato, or does it have some other meaning? I think if the more inquisitive you are about the technological and philological background of every work that you play, the richer your musicianship will be, regardless of what kind of style you play in. That's ultimately, I mean, kind of built my whole career on musical style, but ultimately I don't think it's the most important thing. I think that the most important thing is a rich understanding of each work that you play. And I do think that knowing the musical technology that each composer had is huge. And that's true even for much later music than this. So I guess I would just say, I mean, maybe it's interesting to know my path into historical performance came from a set of kind of intellectual inclinations that I had when I was young. I was, well, my parents have a lot to do with it. My mom did ancient Japanese style papermaking, and my father's an economic historian. So I was always kind of thinking in these historical ways about lots of things. And I was very, very interested in literature as a young man. I was briefly an English major, and I was always very interested in, like, what did that word mean in Shakespeare's time? What does that stage direction mean in relation to the kind of stage that, that would have been in use when Christopher Marlowe had a play presented? That kind of question interested me as a kid. And so it was natural that when I started getting more serious about older music, I asked similar questions, and it was delightful to discover that there are all these people around the world, a whole little community of people around the world who've been asking those questions for a long time, and have come to really interesting conclusions about it. And then getting more deeply into the music was into the actual playing of period instruments was a very gradual process. And I don't really remember deciding to specialize. It just kind of happened over time. And I would encourage you all to not think that it's an either or decision, like I'm going to be a modern player or I'm going to be a period player. It doesn't have to be that way. There are people who do both wonderfully, and also even if you never give a single concert on a period instrument, you will be a far richer musician for knowing something about the history of your instrument and the background of the interpretation of the music you're playing. So that's my little exhortation, my little spiel. Thank you so much for your beautiful playing, for your attention, for being part of our virtual festival. It means a lot, and I hope that I'll see you in person next summer in Maine.
Thank you to everybody. Bravo to all. I was just enjoying all the music and enjoying your comments, Jude, as well.
Thank you, Keith, for running this. It would have been quite impossible without you. Thank you so much. And thank you to Anatole for making this happen as well.
Right,
yeah. For your wonderful work.
Thank you for your words of wisdom and inspiring us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, so with that, we come to a conclusion. Thanks to everybody again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.